that we have done. Okay, go over some quick research that we've been doing in range management, myself and Taylor will be later, and I worked a lot with the late Alan Terrell and Neil Rimby and a group of us that worked with John McClain a lot. There's an area I'll talk about, and then at the outreach, there's also a person on this called Buddy Borden, who's in Clark County Extension, but was an ag econ major at Wyoming, and we've done a lot with. He's doing a lot of them gathering data to show the importance of public lands in local economies as an extension economist to provide information. So I'll just proceed and talk about it. As you see here, this is something from Farm Bureau. As we all know, the West has the public lands. That's an issue that it's totally different from anything in the West, in the East. In fact, like I said, I went in Oklahoma State, and when I came out here, a couple of ranchers said, yeah, that's pretty good. The BLM builds white picket fences for those ranchers. And I went, no. There's a lot of misconceptions, especially in the East and in the Midwest, about what goes on. But as you can see, Nevada also, as we always know, it has the largest amount of public lands than any of the states. And it impacts the economy, and this is some of the research. This little map here is kind of busy, but what it amounts to is how much of our land is public land, and also how it impacts economic development. The contiguous, so you can get things going, land. And land is spaced away. They did this because they're worried about the railroad barons in the 1800s. By being contiguous, it really makes it difficult sometimes for economic development. Plus, as we do other things like, well, green energy, if you put it on public lands, you got other things you have to go through that you don't have to do on private lands. And so we have that, and also down below here, we have our issues with, we have the atomic area and also the Nellis Air Force Base, as well as the Fallon Air Force Base, Naval Base, which are looking at expansion. So the impacts, as I do a lot of economic development stuff, is that what's unique about Nevada is, yes, you can do the economics, but what you have to be aware is the constraints of public lands, and even also the allocations of surface waters, how they impact economic development. As you can see here, not a lot of private land. I'll talk about that later. Here's a quick little picture, basically, of the state. Nevada is 87%. See, all the others still have public lands, but nowhere near. Of course, Alaska has a lot, but a lot of that. State lands, very little state lands. I must admit, Buddy, with the NEAP project, Nevada Economic Assessment Project, is going to be doing some analysis of state lands here. But also, there's private land. So, as you see, there's a lot, we look at the map, a lot of map there with Nevada, but a lot of it is public, and we have the largest amount of land that's administered or owned by federal entities. A little bit about, if you go look at the map, state of Nevada has 110,567 square miles. If you just look on the map, Nevada is the 7th largest state in the nation by acreage, but only 12.2% is private. If you only look at that private land, that makes Nevada the 10th smallest in acreage, about 13,500 square miles. So as for private land, state of Maryland has 12,470, and we're right between them and West Virginia, which has 24,000. And also, it's not contiguous. And so also that has some impact on what happens. So whenever there's any kind of allocations or something going with public lands, and as we've seen in Las Vegas, I think John Restrepo there has done some stuff on here in Washoe County on looking at how public lands constrain as you expand out with the public land SNPLPA and all that. They have a great impact on what goes on in our economies, rural and urban. But yeah, so you look at the map of the state of Nevada, 7th largest state in Nevada in the U.S., but you go down to it, it's about the 10th smallest. You talk about private land acreage there. What I'm going to talk about is some of the studies that we have done, both in research and extension in these different areas. One, I'm going to look at public land grazing. We did an example in Elko County, mining, Elko County, tourism. I say it's already been finished, but what we did in Lincoln County and other things, like I say, Buddy Borden has a very big project going on outdoor recreation. Land-based revenues. This is something on past land-based payments. Kind of look at trends, kind of operates. We're doing a little research on that on PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. But also, you know, okay, on the other side, BLM and the Forest Service have operations out there. Just how much do they impact the local economy? Because they're like an industry out there in many of our areas. They have buildings, they buy goods and services, those kinds of things. Well, we did a study once in Elko County. This is a study that we did with Alan Terrell and Neil Rimby and John Tanaka, in which we look at reductions in BLM grazing. What would it do? And what we did, we developed a representative ranch in the state, in Elko, about 700 cow herd. And what we did is started using it to look at developing what we call linear programming model. And I'll go in that a little bit more. But the main thing on this, on trying to get the valuation of AUMs, is get the value of public land forage. Has been an interest to many people. Knowing that value gives us the ability to assess the rangeland, economics of rangeland improvements, alternative grazing systems, and alternative public land use. What the forage value is important for resource evaluations, or when public lands are allocated to other uses. Now, you see one procedure used is people will go and use ag budgets from land grant cooperative extensions, which is all right. And they take the total gross value of the ranch output is calculated, and all costs except range forage are deducted. And the remaining return residual is called like the grazing value resource of the grazing. However, this method only takes a single time period and does not incorporate the variability of cattle prices that go up and down, and does not include farm income. So what we have to do is develop models that will multi-period, which this one is. And I must admit, we have worked with Michael. He'll be maybe presenting some. We were doing Humboldt. We're doing this also with models in the Humboldt County. The incorporation of the multi-time period basically is done with a what we call an LP model. And Gardner, who is a long time in 1977, long time researcher in rangeland, he said permit values represent the capitalized value of expected future differences between the fee and the value of the forage. So therefore, what we did was employ this model to do this. It's a 40-year model. We have discounted 40 years, and we have allowed it to be variability in ag prices, cattle prices, and we do this very many simulations, and it's for a 700 cattle operation. And we started reducing AUMs. Now, what happens is when you start reducing AUMs, you take a 10%. It does not mean that all that 10% is going to be at one time. Sometimes ranchers can, and they do have private land, and most of them do grow alfalfa hay, and that they can bring some of their cattle into the operation, even buy alfalfa hay outside. Until a point, it really just drops off. Like 50%, we started getting a big drop off. And so what happens that they can maintain their services for a while until that drop off. Now, I will say something about ag producers as opposed to mining. Ag producers will incur higher costs, even lower profits, and stay in operation, where a big mine may have reduced profits and they may just quit. The ag producer kind of keeps on going. But what happens really is that we found that this thing goes on by 50%. You start seeing reductions in more reductions in cattle operations going bankrupt, and this really has an impact there and later on. The study, like I said, this is what we found, and we needed to find that value of the AUM so we can figure out how many, if you take the AUMs off, how much that would impact. So what we did from the study, we derived this kind of Elko County grazing. This is how much we decided that was AUMs permitted in, this is 2006, about 850,000 AUMs were in Elko County. Now, whenever you see studies done, you'll see studies done this way. Federal grazing only. The federal grazing only is the budget. When you look at just at one time period and look at the difference, and the value of production is like $38. That's how much the value of the AUM. And so the total impact with let me back up. What we do then is find out what the livestock sector is, and then by using a thing called input-output, which is an implant model, microcomputer model. It is a model that shows the economic linkages between sectors in an economy. And this is something that Buddy and I've used, and also Michael. And what we do is use this direct input, because livestock, by its purchases of goods and services, has linkages linkages to other sectors of the economy. And from that, we can derive what those are. And from this, you see, if you only use the value of, per AUM only, you only get back 38 bucks. A total economic impact, this is respending of about 68 bucks. Now the total AUMs are down here, 850,000. So if from the grazing only, you get something like $32 million, $32.6 million total economic impact. Direct, the total economic impact is about 5.3 million. Now, if you use what we're talking about, the ranch production, this right here, we incorporate through time, we get a capitalized value of that AUM during bad and high prices. And so from that, we are able to get a direct impact of about $148 per AUM. And the total, so therefore the total economic impact goes from 71.3 million to a total economic impact of 125.4 million. It is a bigger number, but it is, I think, more representative of what that value is. Now, what that means is that livestock is not an economy by itself. It is linked to other sectors in the ELCO, and it's also linked to the forward sectors of ELCO. So it's a very important sector. And many times that we try to do different things with this, and I'll talk about tourism, we have to be aware of how the linkages differ and how they link to the other economies. So what we have done is done this, and then we look at the different sectors and see how they're impacted. So what we can say this much is about our ELCO, and I know I'll talk a little bit what we're doing is expanding this with Michael has done some studies in Humboldt where we encourage water. Now you think about it, when you have a drought, you're going to take AUMs off, but if you can, you're going to bring your cattle back to the private land if you can, and if you have irrigation, you may be able to feed a few, but you also may be able to buy alfalfa hay. But you know, during drought, alfalfa hay prices sky up too. And so what happens is you have that compounding effect. What we don't have here is the impacts of limited water supplies also with decreasing AUMs. And so we're going to be looking at that also to enhance this ability to look at the impacts of alternative public lands and what it might mean to the local economy and the value of AUMs. What I did here, comparison basically, I did something in 2015. ELCO employed about 27,000 people. Job losses from BLM operations, about 533 to 1,212. There was a group that did something for the state of Nevada, Dean Runyon. Estimated 2,000 direct and travel employment in Elko County, about 5,440 people. From Dean Runyon, the estimated travel-related employment at that time, you remember Elko had all these flights coming in with Red Line, but they were showing that the employment in the tourism industry was declining like minus 2.3% each year. I think that's leveled off. But given the negative rate of growth in Elko tourism employment, tourism will never replace jobs that BLM has lost because they reduced grazing. This is something we need to inspect a little bit more, update our data to take a look at the trade-offs that would happen there. Next, this is another study we did for Elko and Eureka. We looked at the hard rock mining. Now, this is the other big natural resource sector. Hard rock mining is gold and silver mining. And again, as you can see in this one, Elko and especially Eureka. Eureka has a big number of 3,000. They have about total employment in gold and silver at that time in 2007. Almost 50% of it was in Eureka, and it made up about 77. A lot of mining going on in Eureka. Of course, everybody lives in Elko and Humboldt. There's something else going on that Buddy and I just finished doing, is looking at the impact of the new lithium mine in Humboldt. So there's a new segment of mining coming on that we need to be aware of. Now, I also say I'm very big on looking at not only building mines, but looking at the backward and forward linkages. Once we build gold, one of the things we have, I noticed in the state of Nevada, we don't reprocess a lot of things. Gold and silver go outside. And we may purchase our Euclids from outside. If we can develop kind of a cluster there, that'll even help our economic development. I always talk about lithium as I come from Texas. And what Texas has oil, yeah, but that's not the deal. Texas had the headquarters of Exxon and all there. They're in Houston, Texas. All the forward processing there is in Texas. That's what I like to see with lithium. If given green energy, like I've always said, green energy has three things. One, you have nighttime, so solar has a hard time with night and clouds. Wind energy, calm winds. Hydro, when you have no water. And so what you need are battery packs, and battery packs we use lithium and all that. That's going to be a big thing. And so this impact maybe even be larger, but just looking at gold and silver, it's very big in our area. And looking at the mining, what we had here is it's very big. As you know, it's a very large industry. It's not linked to the local economy as much as the livestock industry. Livestock has a lot of purchases goods and services locally, and also produces but mining is kind of the mines here, our backward linkages are limited a little bit, and also our forward. That's what we need to develop more. And so the direct, what we end up for, and just showing how they impact, because people are asking about it, is that the economic impact was about $2.3 billion and almost $3 billion in total economic impact for the Elko micropolitan. Elko is a joint of the counties, the economies of Elko and Eureka. You know, the mines are in Eureka, but people live in Elko, so that's what they've done. So in that two areas, you can see it's a very large impact. But what's important here is what we always say. It's not just the total, but what has happened. And then what we also did was show the employment. Some people say, well, tourism can replace mining, but the tourism jobs are completely different in the skills. And so this is where we had mining, what not only with the mining, not only with employment, it's also occupations. And what we've done is showed the different occupations that are impacted. Management operations, finance, yeah, they're linked to finance, architecture, engineering, those kinds of things. A lot of engineering, a lot of what we call STEM employment is in mining. And so it's a very high industry that has a lot of value in it, but also has a lot of paying good jobs and a lot of scientific jobs. And the occupational structure, I think that's very important. When we talk about changing from one sector to the other, you need to look at how the occupation structure changes. And with mining, it's a pretty high-tech group. The other thing we looked at is tourism. Now, outdoor recreations is something that we're doing with NEAP with Buddy Borden. One of the things we've been doing, and I'll go through a little study we did in Caliente, but what we're doing is looking at the economic impacts of tourism. Now, you have to be aware, there's a lot of things coming out of this BEA about outdoor tourism. Tourism, if it's in an economy like Lincoln County, you have to be aware, when we do the economic impacts, you got to figure out where the location of that. If they buy shotgun shells and potato chips outside Lincoln County, that's not an impact to Lincoln County. That's Clark County. And if they buy retail, let's say they buy Fritos, the only thing that stays in the local economy on retail is the markup. And so to get these economic impacts, you need to have that corrected. You need to have what we call import purge. If anything is like you purchase something, they say they purchase something, but they purchased it outside, that's something that needs to be purged out of it and all it. I do know that Mike Taylor is coming up and Buddy are coming up with a big outdoor recreation and showing an economic impacts of this. It's very interesting. The trackers and those things for scouts are a very big economic impact. But also people coming from the outside do buy a lot of their products in Denver outside and they bring it in. That's not an economic impact. They're not purchasing locally. And so this is what I think we're getting a better view of outdoor recreation. And I also will say, it also shows linkages. Now in this Caliente, we find expenditures of the local. And what we're doing is looking at here in Caliente, we looked at the expansion of a new mountain bike operation. Now, what Buddy did with his is they looked at it and they found holes. You know what I mean? Holes is that, yeah, you have this mountain bike, but you don't have a bike repair industry. And so, you know, the economic impacts, the linkages may not be large, but they don't, that's not bad. It shows opportunities. And so there's opportunities for things such as what we've done in Lincoln County and what we're doing now in outdoor recreation, working with outdoor recreation in throughout the state of Nevada. It's not only looking at total economic impacts, but also looking at opportunities where people can expand and do other things with it, and looking at local expenditures. And so recreation is a very, when they talk about outdoor recreation, by the way, for us to use input-output models, there's no tourism sector. Tourism is made up of hotel, lodging, restaurant, retail, sporting goods, all that. It's a kind of what they call satellites, a group of sectors that get in there. And so that's what we have to do to find that. And then I think what Buddy and Michael are finding is that different hunting, like deer, elk, different hunting has different economic impacts and also have different, if you want to dissect the impacts, there are different impacts throughout. And so the different opportunities. Deer hunters tend to stay in a motel, elk hunters outside. But there's also this bigger industry we bumping into, people who do scouting and that kind of stuff. It's a significant sector. So this is multi-use, and so how to make use of that and correctly. And I don't want to overstate it, because when it gets overstated, that's bad. You never should overstate things. And so it kind of gives greater opportunity. Now, like I said, that's studied, and you can get, if you go to UNR Cooperative Extension, the NEAP website, you can Google that. You'll get some of these studies already done from Buddy's operation, and you can contact them to get some information. Example of land-based impacts, basically what we've done is looking at payments, mineral leases, Taylor Grazing Act, Department of Agriculture Appropriations, refuge revenues. These are land-based payments to the state, and then payment in lieu of taxes. This is something I have a grad student looking at, payment in lieu of taxes. What the heck is a payment in lieu of taxes? A lower form of government, local, cannot tax a state or federal. Reno City cannot do property taxes on UNR because it's at upper level. The county of Lincoln cannot do property taxes on the BLM office or because it's at upper level. And so what they have done is done payment in lieu of taxes. These are taxes are supposed to be equivalent to what would be paid and given to local industries, local governments, to help police and do whatever they have to do to maintain operations and safety. Now here's the state of Nevada. This is what I always get a kick out of. State of Nevada federal, you can get this from the interior. The state of Nevada has the largest federal acreage. They have these things that are called entitlement, and we have an extension fact sheet coming out on this. What are these, how they figured this up. I will say under this PILT, DOD does not pay PILT. Be aware of that. And so there are other states. Now, here's the state of Nevada. We have the most federal acreage, but we only get $28 million, or about 50 cents per PILT acreage. California, we have 56 million. California has 43 million. They get 55 million in PILT payments, and we only get 28. Well, what's going on? PILT payments are built on counties. And so what we have is 17 counties in the state of Nevada versus I think 50 or something in California. So just the number of counties means more PILT payments. Now I could say, okay, there's more counties actively administrating the public lands, therefore they get more. But I think, Lincoln County and, Nye County is so huge. Where's the public land? But what we always bump into is a population. There's a population cap. You think income tax is hard to figure out, do this. We're coming up with an extension fact sheet on this. And there's a population cap that always hits us that we can't get more. And so what happens is we don't get a lot of PILT payments. And many of our counties do not use those PILT payments for operations. They use it mainly for capital because it can be variable. It is not something written in the Constitution. They can make that zero at any time. I have seen them where they have said, oh, we're going to pay 50%. So it's highly variable. However, the Congress wants to do it. They can change that completely. You come up with an amount and they only going to pay 50%. Wish I could pay 50% of my property taxes sometimes. But anyway, it does that. You have to be aware of that. But that's kind of an inequity. And this is hard to see. I'm sorry. But as you see, this is what I've done. County populations. This is an extension fact sheet. Clark County is first in population by 2.4 million. They got about 4 million. They rank 6th in qualified acres. The PILT payments about 3.7. They rank 2nd and highest in PILT payments. They get 79. They're ranked 7th. The first one is Washoe County. But what happens? Washoe and Clark are not impacted by this minimum population limit. And so that's what happens. But you get something, let's say Nye County, which has a lot. They get 3 million. They rank 4th. But Lincoln County, which is PILT qualified, is the 3rd largest. They're the 11th lowest. The 11th lowest in getting of the 17 counties on getting PILT payments because they're limited by that population thing. The other thing we need to take a look at is BLM operations. This is something what Buddy and I are trying to do also, is try to contact, because they're like an industry. They're a branch, I call them a branch industry. The headquarters is in DC, they're a branch, they hire people. BLM is the largest public land manager in the state. Hopefully we can get some information. BLM in 2012 managed about 4.8 million acres, or 67% of the Nevada's land. Physically, 2013 BLM had direct employment of about 4,700 people, economic output of about $542 million. Overall, they had an economic impact of total employment impact of about 7,600 jobs, about 1.0 billion in economic activity. Even in Lincoln County and some of our smallest, it's probably the largest economic engine in local economies. So it is something we want to also go back and try to get in more update information to see the operations, because it's just like an industry there. They have, okay, you got that industry, you got the people there, where they're buying their goods and services, can they buy locally? That what's their payroll and those kinds of things. So they have an economic impact, and so what the trade-offs is seeing what they have as an industry to a local economy such as Lincoln County. Economic development issues. This is something that federal land operations and employment, that's something we need to look at. The urban-rural interface, that's always something that we'd be talking about. PILT payments, is there a better way of doing PILT payments or this kind of stuff? Remember, and also changes, because federal land, like I say, DOD, which is Nellis and Nass and Fallon, are not part of the PILT. So if they expand their land, but also, there's also areas like in Lincoln County, when they expanded Groom Mountain, we found no impact on the amount of PILT payments. Why? How come? Because they're impacted by that lower population. You have to take a lot of land out before you go to this other branch of estimation. Lands are not contiguous. And that makes economic development difficult. And I think this is something John Restrepo has looked at in Clark County and here in Sparks. Sometimes in Clark County, quite frankly, the people are looking at economic development. You hear water, water, but it's also land. They can't expand out. And I think that's even in Sparks. I call matching problems. Buddy and I have always done this. We work for the Economic Development Administration. They want to match. You can't match federal lands. You got 98%, you know. A fellow at Michigan State, he had an old automobile plant that was depreciated. He was able to get that valued and use that as a match to do some more automobile employment. I can't match any of the operations. And so, you know, one time I had an it hurts us. Not only public lands, but surface waters reallocations have impact. This is true. This is what we always look at. And I also want to end up and give them 5 minutes here. Buddy in Nevada Cooperative Extension in Las Vegas, Buddy, they have this neat Nevada Economic Assessment Project. They have a very good set of data, and looking at one of the issues is looking at where they can look at different issues. And one of them is, how do public lands impact local economies and those things. So I got about 5 more minutes left. And so here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions, Dan, I just want a little time for people to ask me questions they have. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was great. A lot of great information. We do have some time, so if anyone has any questions, you can type them directly in the chat box, or you can just and ask Tom a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, thanks. That was a great presentation. Thank you. On the population part of it, wouldn't it make sense that the population would be growing if it wasn't surrounded by federal land? And is that taken into consideration at all?
No. Remember, this is something written up by the Bureau. This is something written up by Congress. Okay, that's number one, to be cautionary. Number two, it has certain population levels. Now, if you go beyond, one thing you're right. If your population grows, let's say it's from 0, I'm just making this up, please don't. If your population from 0 and 2000, you get 15 cents per acre. If your population is between 2,000 to 4,000, you get 20 cents per acre. If your population, but it's not projected, if your population jumps up to higher, you will get more. If population is a limit to what your pill payment is. Like I said, we're going to be developing an extension fact sheet. We've already got, I think I'm talking to Buddy, we got one on the states like I showed, but we're getting on how each county. And if you think income tax is difficult, you can go through this PILT operation. But yes, it's just a stated, what they have is some count. They have these populations in a table, and they tell you how much you get per acre. If your population is a certain amount, that's what you get.
Looks like we have a question from first,
Oh, no.
and then we'll go to you, Don, next. Go ahead.
Who's next?
It looks like Sherm was up next.
Oh, Sherm.
Oh. Hey, Tom.
Hey,
Great presentation.
Well, you're still alive, Sherm. I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, by golly. Hey, I was thinking in your talking about various multiple uses and how the discussion about economics often comes up when there's a trade-off, more of X, less of Y. And yet often the production of X is greater when there's some of Y. And so we have this optimization of the optimum amount of X and Y in order to have the total best economic production from both.
True.
And generally we're better off with multiple use because there's not that much competition among uses. Has any of your economic studies discussed that, about how to optimize the trade-offs among the various multiple uses?
Not, but what you're talking about is instead of being competitive, they're complementary.
Right.
I would say, you know, we got like I said, we're starting to get initial data, good data on outdoor recreation. Maybe there's some complementarity. I know in Texas, where I come from, in the Uvalde area, they got 12-foot fences to keep the deers in. It's not to keep the jumping Holsteins in. It's that ranchers in Texas have found that their ranching operations, they complement their income by people hunting for elk and deer out there in Uvalde. There's potential. There is. It gets to a point, and then there's competitive. I mean, but throughout that's a good point that could be looked at. That needs to be looked at. Quite frankly, it's getting dated there now. We're getting data that we can do that. If you have the range operations, quite frankly, I think, Sherm, you'd be one. This is where we need the production people. If you took cows off, would there a potential be a reduction in deer population? What I understand, that I'm not a physical scientist. Now, maybe cows grazing also increase the deer. Now, cows grazing also reduce rangeland fires. There's a complementarity right there.
I remember a comment by Bob McQuivy, who used to be the habitat guy. Back in the 80s, he said, "I sure hope the ranchers can get their act together because we couldn't produce our deer without ranching."
True. I know wherever that research is, Sherm, I'm about like you, I'm getting ready to retire. Somebody may know where that research is that we can show that cattle grazing has a complementary impact on the fuels there of the grazing, what we can call it, I'll call it fuels for growth there. It's complementary, how it complements with deer. And I would say it's kind of a curve. It's not a linear curve. It's a curvilinear curve. There's going to be some complementary areas that we need to be looking at. And we haven't done that. Yes. I agree with you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Tom. This is Don Henderson.
Well, Don, how you doing?
I'm well. Happy New Year's and everyone else. Hey, Tom, your modeled ranch up in Elko and the numbers that came out of that for grazing. I guess my question to you is those are great numbers. Are they applicable to other portions of the state? For instance, Humboldt County, if we had a reduction of grazing in Humboldt County, could you use those estimates on what the the effects that reduction might be on the local economies?
Okay. Let me get there. Okay, there's two things. I'll let Michael. Michael has developed a model in Humboldt County. There's also some other models I work. I work a lot with Texas A&M Ag and Food Policy Center, and they have done some representative models. And we've done one. You remember old Bill Champion used to be in our Ag Econ department. Bill would always talk about there's different. You go north of 50 and south of 50. North of 50 is kind of a rule of thumb. It's 50% on public, 50% on private. And south of 50 around Lincoln, we have a Lincoln County model that we use that is totally public. So in different areas, you need different models. Now, I know Michael has developed one in Humboldt County, which also incorporates alfalfa production, which this one does, but does not include, irrigation, which we need to look at. Yes, we need different areas. This one is for 700 head operation. With a 350 operation be different in Elko. So, you get about as close as you can to an operation because you can go nuts figuring out different things. I would say, there is necessary for us, and it's going to be, we need an LP model in southern Nevada, where we got one with the Aggies. We got a simulation model, a financial simulation model with the Aggies in southern in Lincoln County. Totally different operation. When it's 100%, it's almost 100%. What would you say, Don? About 99% public and 1% private. It's the water holes, and so it's total different results and models we need for southern Nevada versus northern.